Yeah, and the taxpayers are on the hook, and there's no real accountability. You can say, oh, you can go complain to the school board meeting, but we saw how well that worked out during the COVID years too. They labeled parents as domestic terrorists for complaining about CRT. They
Look at
cut off people's mics for complaining about gender ideology. That's a fairy tale model of accountability. The only true form of accountability is from the bottom up, allowing people to vote with their feet, like we do with every other industry.
Hi, Culminators. Today, we're going to talk to one of the culture warriors that we love to have on. He's a nice guy, but he gets things done on behalf of the children. But when we say on behalf of the children, we mean it. We're talking about Corey DeAngelis, who describes himself as a school choice evangelist. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Although I went to decent public schools myself, I don't think there are that many of those around anymore. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, no, mine is great, you might be right, but you might not be right. Corey is a senior fellow on the American Culture Project, visiting fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research, executive director of the Educational Freedom Institute. I mean, this guy is connected. Okay. No, I'm not done. He's a member of the board of the Liberty Justice Center, one of those centers, and senior advisor to an organization that is actually older than the internet, if I'm not mistaken, Accuracy in
Mhm.
Media. And that tells you something, because that's not some virtual invention. Accuracy Media has been around forever. Corey, how you doing? Thanks for coming on.
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Ron.
I forgot to mention also that you are author of The Parent Revolution. Corey, how do we get here? What's your
Well, we have
understanding of
this.
how we got here?
Yeah, well, the main problem is that we are assigned to schools based on our address, and that gives the government school system tons of monopoly power. They have no incentive to spend additional dollars wisely, and they're in bed with the teachers union, which is a far left money laundering operation for the Democrat Party. You look at Randy Weingarten's union, the most
Oh,
recent election cycle, about 99% of her campaign contributions went to Democrats. It's a one-sided political organization. It ought to be illegal, this form of money laundering that happens every single election cycle. And what we've seen with their annual conventions this past summer is they're all about politics, and they have nothing to do with education. They're injecting their far left agenda into the classroom, and they really stepped on a rake during COVID, in particular, when they fought to keep the schools closed and showed parents what the hell was happening in the schools, which really fueled a school choice revolution. There's been a mass exodus from government schools. Over 1 million kids have left the school system. And guess what? You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. We should thank Randy Weingarten and Becky Pringle for being such social justice activists, putting politics into the classroom. That they overplayed their hand and inadvertently done more to advance school choice and homeschooling than anyone could have ever imagined.
well, Randy Weingarten is a favorite punching bag of mine. She is a really reprehensible character. Um, I didn't realize that this recent, and wasn't there actually, wasn't kind of the news out of that national convention that they actually failed to pass something that was actually too much even for the teachers union?
Yeah, well, yes. So a couple of things. In 2019, when they made these things public, they published one of their resolutions that they defeated to realign themselves to being about education. So they killed that resolution. But then this year, a member leaked these resolutions to me because they weren't happy about it. Lo and behold, they have a couple conservatives that go to these conventions as well. and I blasted it on X, and it turned into a firestorm in the media. They passed a resolution to cut ties with the ADL, but then their executive board said, they saw the pushback in the media and said, we better block this one. And they blocked that resolution to cut ties with the ADL. All of their other resolutions read more like a declaration of war on the Trump administration than anything else. In one of their resolutions, they passed something to dedicate thousands of dollars to label Trump as a fascist. And in that resolution, they misspelled the word fascism. I mean, you almost can't make this stuff up.
Well, it is, you talk about misspelling. I mean, teaching used to be a profession. Well, is it really a profession? Is teaching a profession?
I mean,
You have to get a license. You have to get a license, and you can lose your license, at least to be a public school teacher.
Yeah, but they aren't really treated like in the status quo system because they aren't rewarded based on merit. The unions fight to protect the lowest common denominator teachers in the system. And so you have this perverse incentive for the best teachers to leave. They go do something else. If the math teachers who can get these engineering jobs, they look at over the English teachers getting paid the same. They look across the hall for these people who are just sitting there watching videos with the students who had been there for a long time, who are doing a horrible job. And so the best teachers leave after a couple of years. And I would say we should fight for merit pay, but also, more importantly, school choice, so that their employer has an incentive to spend money wisely. Because, I mean, the teacher salaries don't go up over time, but the spending does. We've increased per student funding in the United States public school system by about 170% after adjusting for inflation since 1970. But teacher salaries have been flat. They've only increased by about 3% in real terms. It goes towards administrative bloat more than anything else.
Well, I mean, you just shared about the story of that school district superintendent
Yeah.
who made a neat $229,000 for a few months of non-work.
It's crazy. This guy landed a job as a superintendent in Missouri in the St. Louis area. And then right before the school year is supposed to start, he hasn't worked a single day, mind you. He announces a resignation where he gets a settlement of about a year's salary of about $230,000. And then 3 days after that, there's an announcement in Oklahoma that he gets hired as an assistant superintendent over there. Sounds fishy to me. It sounds like they're passing the trash.
There really doesn't seem to be any sense of accountability. And these people just spend, it's not their money, it's not their kids, and it's just a toy chest.
Yeah, and the taxpayers are on the hook, and there's no real accountability. You can say, oh, you can go complain to the school board meeting, but we saw how well that worked out during the COVID years too. They labeled parents as domestic terrorists for complaining about CRT. They cut off people's mics for complaining about gender ideology. That's a fairy tale model of accountability. The only true form of accountability is from the bottom up, allowing people to vote with their feet like we do with every other industry.
And I think that your choice of the word industry is quite purposeful. There is this sense that we have that, well, it's the public school. And this is coming from, and of course, public schooling is a really old institution in the United States. So we don't associate it with socialism. But it is also, it's the oldest socialized industry. And the fact that we entrust our children to it, and that the vast majority of us had decent experiences in public school. I don't know how to measure that, but I mean, most of us had a good association with public school. I learned some stuff. I know I could have learned a lot more, but that wasn't necessarily anyone's fault but mine. There's a real cultural benefit of the doubt, a deference that people still give to public schools and to teachers.
Yeah, it's this tyranny of the status quo. It's been like this forever, so that's how it always needs to be, I would say we should rebrand them from public schools to government schools because they're run by the government, they're regulated by the government, they are assigned by the government, they're compelled by the government. They're not open to the public like a public park. Families have gone to jail for lying about their address to get into better so-called quote unquote public schools for their kids. They're not a public good based on the economic definition. They are rivalrous. They are excludable. They do exclude people. They discriminate based on zip code, and they're not accountable to the public. In places like Chicago, they have 55 public schools or government schools with not a single kid proficient in math, despite spending $30,000 per student per year. These are failure factories more than anything else.
And the word factories is another good choice. I mean, I learned many years ago that you can trace what our public school system looks like to the Industrial Revolution.
That's right.
And there is this, I mean, it strikes me as a little bit of a Marxist take, but there is a take that says schools are all about training workers. And
That's right.
in fact, I think they probably
It's
wouldn't have denied that.
the government school system is the eighth plank of the Communist Manifesto. It's in there as well. So they know. I mean, what's funny is for the unions to call people who don't want centralized control of education, quote unquote, fascist, they're getting their history completely backward. No wonder only 15% of kids in the US are proficient in US history. But fascist dictators over time, they liked a government run control school system because they were able to brainwash the masses into being okay with authoritarian tendencies. But it's if you can trace back our compulsory education system to Prussia, which is modern day Germany, and the father of public education in America, his name was Horace Mann. He actually homeschooled his own kids. So talk about hypocrisy there. He thought the masses needed this industrialized factory model school system. But they created this system in Prussia because they had lost the war. And they thought, what better way to create obedient soldiers than to start with molding people's mind at a young age? And what better way to do that than to have them at school throughout the day for several years? And so we still see some of these remnants of this command and control school system today. You have to raise your hand for everything you do. All the information is force fed down the student's throat from the top down to be regurgitated on standardized tests. And the way we learn today is from the bottom up. It's not forced on us. It's more about experiences and reading and searching for information based on your interests. But when it's forced on you from the top down, like we have in our government factory model school system, you're going to forget a lot of that information. A lot of kids do after the test.
So we're kind of delving here into educational philosophy, which is obviously relevant, but it's interesting to me that you say this because no, I haven't been in public school since the Carter administration. Okay. Well, again, no, I guess I graduated during the Reagan administration, but the sense I get of what public schools look like now is that they're a lot less authoritarian, a lot more permissive, and that indeed no one is being required to learn anything that they don't have an inherent or an instinctive interest in. And that we're not better off for that. Isn't there something to be said for people who are, I don't want to go into the world of education degrees because that's one of the all-time rackets as well, but people who are masters, people who are scholars, deciding what should be taught, not necessarily to everyone, not for every child and not to every degree, but going back to the idea of school before we have public schools, right? The academies of the classical world, there have always been traditional curricula that, yeah, you may or may not remember the Iliad, but the idea has always been if you're exposed to it, and you're going to learn a whole bunch of other things, including how to achieve, how
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
excel, how to be responsible.
Yeah, I think those things are okay. I think the problem with our current system, though, is that you have special interests and not, academics who are who who know like what all kids should read and learn. You basically have the teachers unions dumbing down the curriculum for everybody. You have the teachers unions lobbying politicians to, I mean, in places like Oregon, you don't even have to learn how to read or do math, and you can still get your high school diploma. I mean, in the name of so-called equity. So they've lowered the bar in a lot of these school systems, and I think that has been to make it easier on the teachers unions as opposed to helping the kids.
How did the teachers unions become such a powerful vector, I think would be the word,
Yeah.
for woke and even morally perverted, and everyone who watches this program knows what I'm talking about. And certainly anyone who follows you. The sick stuff, I mean, again, yes, your activists in unions have always been left oriented, have always been more liberal, although we all knew conservative teachers, when
Mhm.
we were kids in school. But the trans stuff and the so-called anti-racism, which is just a form of reverse
Yeah.
racism.
Yep.
What how did we get to the world of Randy Weingarten?
They have a lot of political muscle and boots on the ground. So whenever they get more money, they tend to just hire more people. And if you look at the trends since 2000 in America, our student enrollment has been flat since 2000, basically the same number of students as 25 years ago. The number of teachers in the system over time have increased by about 10%, and the number of administrators has increased by a whopping 95%. And the union bosses benefit from this, staffing surge or administrative bloat, whatever you want to call it, because more dues paying members means more max. That's how they maximize union revenues. And it also helps them push their political pet projects with more boots on the ground. So I think these unions are communist organizations at heart. FDR even warned against public sector unions because
Biggest mistake in American policy of the
they're
20th
using
century.
they're
There are
using the
many
public's
huge
money.
mistakes. Public employee unions are so contrary. I mean, look, the whole we people. I mean, this is even before Coleman's time. It's been well over 100 years that the decision was made at the federal level that unions would be considered a legal thing, that they weren't going to be considered a restraint of trade, which was what they were before then. And that was a gigantic leap forward. But the idea that you could put a gun to the head of a municipality or a state, uh, which you can't do at the federal level, is so mind-boggling. Because guess what? They can't go out of business.
That's right. That's right. And so for a long time, the dues were compulsory. I mean, the funding is compulsory on the part of the taxpayer. You have to fund the school system. Um, and the union dues used to be compulsory in some states, but now we've had a Supreme Court decision 7 years ago, the 2018 Janus decision that was represented by the Liberty Justice Center, which I'm on the board of. I wasn't on the board at the time, to be clear, but that's a big deal in that now teach teachers unions cannot mandate that public sector employees pay dues as a condition of employment. So we're trying to convince a lot of teachers to pull their funding from those unions to starve the beast, if you will, by getting the personal liability insurance somewhere else. Because a lot of conservative teachers say, yeah, I don't want to fund these Democrat campaigns through the unions. I know I can opt out, but I want that protection. Well, there's now alternatives. One is the Association of American Educators. They do it for far less than the average union dues. There's the Christian Educators Association for if you want a faith-based one. And there's also the newest one that just launched is called Teacher Freedom Alliance, and they're giving the liability insurance away for free. I think it's covered by donors, but look, teachers can pocket more of their own money. They don't have to fund the political activity because that would be a violation of their First Amendment rights, funding speech that they disagree with and political causes. And so now I think that's the way to incentivize the unions to do the right thing. You can defund them by leaving, and then also school choice can defund them by allowing families to vote with their feet. You kind of hit them with the two-pronged approach. If we can't outlaw the public sector unions altogether, I would at least like some incremental reforms like school choice and letting teachers go somewhere else, kind of incentivize people like Randy Weingarten to change their game because they've been so drunk on power for so long. Ron, I think that's why it's gotten so bad. It's because they haven't really had to adapt. They've been in control for so many years and had no consequences for their actions. But now there's members of Congress calling to revoke the NEA's federal charter, for example. They've had it since 1906. I have no idea. They're the only union in the country that has the backing of Congress. It's insane.
And what does that mean? That's the first I've ever even heard
So
of it.
they get exemptions from certain taxes in Washington, D.C. for their offices. They get kind of this aura of authenticity, this stamp, this backing by the federal government allows them to be in a better position to lobby politicians to say that they have this kind of this
Considering that they're
authenticity.
actually, I mean, they are part of the Democratic Party. So it's mine, and a part of the Democratic Party that pushes it to the left. Although Randy Weingarten herself
Left.
decided, yeah,
After 23 years, the New York Times reports this as if everybody knew that this was happening. I had no idea Randy Weingarten had a position at the DNC for 23 years. Becky Pringle still has her at-large position at the DNC. So I've called them an arm of the Democrat Party, but in a way, they're one and the same thing, Ron. They're on the same team. They're at the same table, arguing for the same policies, pushing for the same politicians. And Republicans in Congress should say, to hell with that. Why should Congress, which the Republicans control both chambers in the president's office, they should not put their stamp of approval on this political organization that's one-sided in favor of the Democrats.
You know that this one will be that is one bill that would be absolutely filibustered.
Yeah,
Would never get through the
that's
Senate.
the problem.
I mean, that is even though it's probably not economically as meaningful as, I mean, in given it in the scheme of things, but the symbolism of it would be mind-boggling. I leapt ahead because I'm so full of, there's just so much to talk about it, and I'm so animated by this issue. But who are you? How'd you get yourself into this? What's your background?
Yeah, I'm Corey DeAngelis. They call me the school choice evangelist. That was actually my enemies at the Arkansas Times and some other outlets had said that a few times. And then after the third time or so, I put it on my Twitter bio. So
pretty good.
X bio, everybody sees it now. But Randy Weingarten at their annual convention last year, she put up pictures of 3 people as their primary enemies at the union convention on stage behind her on her slideshow. One was Betsy DeVos, another one was Chris Rufo, and then the third one was yours truly. And if you're catching flack, you're over the target. One other thing, Ron, I don't know if you've seen this yet. You mentioned my book. It's endorsed by Trump. It's a national bestseller. And I dedicated it to Randy Weingarten for
that's right, I saw that.
For accidentally helping the school choice movement. Every time she opens her mouth, it should be counted as an in-kind contribution to the Republican Party and the school choice movement. But she came out with a new book, and it looks exactly like my cover. It's insane.
Really?
She copied my book cover. I'm not even kidding. The font is the same. The kind of the color scheme is the same, and the word that's in red in my cover is parent. The word that's in red on her cover is fascist. Sounds like she's calling parents fascist. if you ask me. But I'm sure you're looking it up right now. But
I am.
I
I think I missed that. I knew.
it's
I
insane. It makes no. Just look at Rainey Weingarten book or something. You'll find it, and it's exactly like my cover. I'm not even. I had to like do a triple take. I went into the room. I was my wife was by me. I got to go get a copy of my book because this looks familiar. There it is. Well, what the hell? It's crazy. So I guess maybe she dedicated it back to me. I don't know. I sent her a copy of mine. Hers isn't in print yet until next month, so we'll see what she's up to. But I mean, I guess I called them communist on my cover basically by using the red fist. It references the radicals ruining our schools. So she came back and called us fascist. I guess that was her play, her clap back, whatever you want to call it. But I got into this, Ron, as a researcher of all things. I was at the University of Arkansas. I did a PhD there, and I would look at the
and
effects of
your
school
background's
choice
in economics?
programs. Yeah, I did a master's and bachelor's in economics, but for my PhD, it was in education policy. It was more like an economics of education program. We were very numbers heavy. It wasn't like Jill Biden's PhD education
No, no,
doctorate.
no. You could have been studying poultry farms. You're looking at it as an enterprise.
Yep.
My undergraduate is in economics, so I what do they teach? What do you get from at least in the 1980s bachelor's degree is you learn to how to use terminology. That's
Yep.
pretty much what you look. So I completely understand that, but I see that that's your paradigm. That's how you approach the whole analytical
Yeah,
problem.
I mean, I I got into this seeing it as a problem of monopoly power, and I just compare it to grocery stores very often. Mamdani, don't give him any ideas. He in his platform calls for government-run grocery stores, but if food is too important to be left to the government, isn't education too important to be left to the government? They ruin everything they touch. Socialist countries have had millions of people die throughout history for having empty shelves. And imagine if we were assigned to government grocery stores. They would have no incentive to do a better job. They would tell us to go complain to the grocery board, get in the queue, we'll listen to you. Oh, we promise we'll do better if you just increase your property taxes and fund us even more and more and more. And we promise we'll have food on the shelves next week, even though we didn't have it this week. And it's the same problem with the school system. We have no recourse. The complaining to the board doesn't work. We've seen that. Throwing more money at the problem doesn't work. We've seen that. You have to be able to go somewhere else so that they say, maybe we shouldn't label this person as a terrorist when they complain. Maybe we should treat them as like a customer and listen to them. And Ron, more recently, I've kind of taken it more personally. I've seen it through the lens of an economist, and that's a good argument for school choice and decentralizing education and putting parents in the driver's seat. But more recently, I'm a father. I have a 1-year-old named Angelina, and I see it more through a parental rights issue.
Angelina DeAngelis.
Angela, the angel of the angels. She really is an angel, and we're homeschooling her right now. You homeschool before kindergarten. We all do.
Right.
And I see this as an issue of parental rights. It's paramount because the alternative is that the kids and the money meant for educating them belong to the government. I don't see things that way. I think parents should be in charge. They know their kids more than anybody else. They have the best incentives aligned to get the decision right for their own kids. Certainly more than bureaucrats sitting in offices hundreds of miles away. And so those are the kind of the two lenses that I see this through. And we've had Supreme Court precedent on this, I mean, for decades, but one of the first cases was the 1925 Pierce versus Society of Sisters case because Oregon had outlawed private education altogether. And the court, thankfully, 3 years later, famously ruled that the child is not the mere creature of the state. And so I think those are some wise words that some politicians would be wise to remember these days.
It's very troubling, the attitude that they have, and given the really strong ideological orientation now in the schools, they're, I mean, look at the product. Look, and it goes all the way through higher education now as well. To a large extent for the same reasons. You have, this radicalization of faculties. Just listen, I want to ask a more pertinent question. The other one's not lacking in pertinence, but a better question. How about that? School choice. Now, in economics, choice is one of those magic words. But we also know about rent seeking. There's all kinds of rent seeking,
Hmm.
all kinds of, and that's largely what you've described with the teachers unions. After all, they act like monopolists. They're oriented to maximizing output, not maximizing either quality or even profit, just
Hmm.
growth, output. Um, Last year, I remember, and I think the to some extent the um, discussion has moved on because so much else is going on,
Hmm.
culture wars. But there was a lot of pushback from people I associate with the libertarian right, or libertarian oriented right. Even I think guys like James Lindsay.
Yeah.
You're being sold a bill of goods on school choice. It's really not any better. It's just other people or other institutions, wolves in sheep's clothing.
Mhm.
What was that about?
Tell that to the 600,000 families using scholarships in Florida right now that it's just it's not any better. Well, they're making decisions for their kids, getting less than what was spent in the government school system, saving taxpayer money, and
But there
they
must have
like
been
it.
something.
Yeah,
I assume
I
their argument wasn't just you're
no, no,
not
no.
getting as good of an education. There must have been
The
something.
argument can be summarized as this. The argument that James and others have made is that with government shekels comes government shackles. Um, and I would argue that that's making perfect the enemy of the good because you can already get the shackles without the shekels. The government can already regulate private and home education today, and they do. In places like New York City, they say that the private education sphere has to be quote unquote substantially equivalent to the public school system, and they don't have school choice mechanisms. They have the worst homeschooling laws on the books in New York and in places like Massachusetts. On the flip side, places that have more school choice tend to have more homeschooling freedom too. And so we can't make perfect the enemy of the good. We have to look at the incremental reforms that are going to be most beneficial towards advancing liberty. And it's all voluntary, and it has been for decades of examples of this. That you can make that cost benefit decision for your own families, whether to accept the funding or not. Same with the schools. And you look at places like Illinois this year, they got rid of school choice a couple of years ago in 2023. Their Democrats killed it. But this year they introduced a bill to regulate homeschooling. So my argument is school choice is not the problem. The problem is that we have authoritarians in office that do two things at once. They fight against school choice and they also fight against homeschooling and private education freedom together. On the flip side, Republicans can walk and chew gum at the same time too. And in states where they've expanded school choice, they've deregulated home and private education at the same time. But school choice also has a side benefit in that it helps you bring more people into the tent. Politics is all about organized interest pushing for what they want. The unions do this all the time. But when you have school choice, you bring more people into homeschooling and private education who are going to give you a better shot at fighting back against authoritarian overreach in the future. And so you'll have a stronger coalition to lock arms. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And Thomas Sowell famously said, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And school choice, although it's not a perfect solution, it is one of the best ones that we have available today, especially because it's all voluntary and allows people to us to take a step in the direction towards more freedom, even if it's not total freedom.
Well, I would suggest also. I'm sure you've thought and written about this, and you're also, just by virtue of taking students and families out of the system, The system, you're giving them, it's just an entirely different dynamic.
Yeah.
I hear from homeschooling parents, and they're obviously the most successful ones, the ones who I'm hearing from, because first of all, the ones who I'm in touch with through the internet are people who are intellectually oriented. They're so that these are people who are having great results.
Mhm.
But even if the results were exactly the same, and really how much worse could they be
Yeah.
than what most, especially the major public schools are now? You, you have this, the schools have become a toxic environment. And you have the bullying. And one thing I consistently hear is that there is no, like, what you would think in a sort of a facile way, but it's an easy enough thing to pop into your head, is that, well, if you do homeschooling, your child isn't going to learn to socialize. They're not going to meet all kinds of people from all kinds of different, and that people consistently tell me, it's the exact opposite. Our kids are so
Exactly.
confident. They don't, they're not accustomed to or oriented toward the whole high school cafeteria, clique kind of behavior. Like, they're humane, they're human people, and they're educated also, by the way.
Yeah, and not all forms of socialization are positive forms of socialization. You mentioned the bullying in the public school system. I went to public schools all through K through 12, and it was a cool thing to do drugs, to get rolled into the gang, get beat up in the bathroom. It was a gang initiation process. I mean, that was kind of I talk about in my book in one of the first chapters that I had a friend who went to the school with me, and he tried to tell me I was not walking the correct way because I wasn't walking with a limp. That was kind of the social capital. That was kind of the
That was
incentives
the
that
thing
were
that year.
baked into that was the kind of socialization, right? That was, and I would argue that homeschoolers can maximize positive interactions and forms of socialization while cutting out a lot of the crap that could lead to things like teenage pregnancies that we've seen in the public school system, gang activities, a life of crime. I mean, I mentioned that I started as a researcher. My first study actually linked the Milwaukee voucher program that started in 1990. We had student level data from the state mandated evaluation until they were about 30 years of age. And we looked up their criminal records later on in life, controlled for demographic differences across sectors, and found a large reduction in crime later on in life from getting the opportunity to go to a private school through the voucher program. So I would say the homeschoolers, most of the evidence shows they knock it out of the park academically, but also socially, they're either on par or doing better than their similarly matched peers in the public school system. Because I mean, yeah, you can find other ways to socialize. You can enroll in club sports. You can join a chess team. There are other ways to interact with people. And by the way, in what other area of like after we leave college or K through 12, are we interacting with people our exact same age, who live in the exact same neighborhood as us, for 7 hours a day, whether we want to be around them or not? No, that's a weird, that is so unnatural and wrong. I think it creates more problems than it fixes.
If I could give you the benevolent power, would you, and I could give you the power to reform the public schools, would you reform them, or would you end them?
So, in reality, the best kind of incremental reform we have that's feasible, I know that's not the question you're asking, would be kind of tweaking it at the edges. But if we had to start from scratch, I would say government wouldn't run any schools at all. There's no reason we should have government run schools. They could all be private. You could even say, oh, but schooling or education has like these positive spillover effects. It's a merit good. Well, as Milton Friedman pointed out in his 1955 essay, just because there are social benefits to a well-educated populace, that doesn't mean the government needs to run the schools. That would be an argument for maybe we should subsidize it through taxation. But even then, why would we fund it for everybody? Why should taxpayers have to foot the bill for Bill Gates' education? If we had to start from scratch, I would say either privately fund it through voluntary donations for the least advantaged, or if taxpayer money is going to be involved, it should only be for the least advantaged, kind of like what we do with food stamps today. We don't have food stamps for billionaires, and we don't have government running the grocery stores that you can take the food stamps dollars to. You can go to Walmart if you want.
So the response to that is a response you hear all the time in school choice debates is you're going to have then a brain drain of all the better kids, and the worse districts will become even worse. I have no trouble formulating the response to that, which is maybe they better get better.
Yeah, maybe if you're so worried about losing funding, you better shape up and you won't have to worry about any competition. But I mean, we already have that. That is the status quo, Ron. We have inequality baked into the government school system. You have people who buy their houses. The realtors they'll advertise based on the school that you're assigned to. So people are already self-selecting into school systems based on their how much they can afford.
Look, I live in Clifton, New Jersey. Clifton, New Jersey is no great shakes, but it's next to Patterson and Passaic. So there's a major problem of school address cheating in Clifton, because Clifton is just mediocre. It's not Patterson and it's not Passaic. So, and then of course the elite are already choosing private schools anyway. But when we talk about also, these socioeconomic factors, I mean, we've got also a problem now, which is the parents. I was astonished when I first started raising children to hear that there was such a thing as parents doing homework for their kids.
Oh,
it was, and neither of my parents went to college. I did not come from an academic family, but it was just understood that you go to school, you do your homework.
That's right.
But that's the least of it. I mean, at least the parents are doing the homework. At least someone's doing the homework. I mean, to some extent, how difficult is it to talk about education policy in an environment when there's a social, cultural meltdown underway anyway?
Yeah, I would say getting reforms like school choice in place, while it might not fix all of the issues with parents, it does incentivize them to become more involved in their kids' education. There's actually a study by Cornell researchers in 2018. I forget the name of it, but you can probably find it. I think the name is like Does Choice Increase Information or something. They found that when school choice programs were implemented in an area, the online search activity for different schools started to spike. And I think it's because when let's say you're from a low income family and it's just depressing for you to look up alternative options if you can't afford them in the current system. But now that if you have like $10,000 following the child, those parents, I bet you, are going to be much more likely to become much more involved. That doesn't mean that they're all going to become more involved. We can't fix every single societal issue with school choice or even other education reforms, but at the margins, it should lead to improvements, not just for academic outcomes and values being aligned with the school's curriculum, but also getting parents more involved in a healthy way with their kids. Because sometimes I'll hear, well, school choice sounds great and all, Corey, but what about those parents that are doing drugs and stuff, and how are they going to choose is the argument. And I'll say, well, we shouldn't use outliers to dictate policy. If I were to do that about the public schools, that means we should abolish all of them tomorrow, because there's, a Department of Education report from 2006, 20 years ago, they need to redo it. There was actually a more recent one a couple of years ago in Psychology Today. They highlighted the findings, both finding the same thing, that over 10% of kids are estimated to be sexually abused by the educators themselves by the time they hit high school.
What age?
So
What percentage?
more than 1 in 10, and that's just from the educators. That doesn't count student to student problems. So my point is, I'm not going to point to one example of something and say we should blow the entire system up. So the defenders of the status quo shouldn't point to one or two parents who might not make the right choices and say, well, then nobody should be able to make choices at all. I mean, that's, it's kind of, there was a Harvard professor actually a couple of years, well, actually in 2020, they were calling to ban homeschooling, and they were using this kind of argumentation. They were saying, well, there might be some parents who might miseducate their kids. There might be some parents who, don't do it the right way. And my response was, well, first of all, that's their proposal was a violation of the Fourth Amendment. They basically wanted parents to prove their innocence. And my other response was they had no data to support this, especially when the public school system fails on a much larger scale.
Yeah, that's always anecdotal. I just have one more conceptual question. It probably would have made more sense to ask it half an hour ago, but just popped into my head. Europe,
Yep.
they've been into socialized stuff far longer than we have. They have their unions can put just about all of ours to shame, except perhaps the teachers union, but they don't seem to have the same problem.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about China, because that's people make ridiculous comparisons to Eastern countries, and China in particular, and they're impressed by mass performances,
Yeah.
and things that have nothing to do with learning and nothing to do with thinking or reasoning, and the things that we want to educate people about. But isn't I have the impression that things are
Yeah.
worse in American education by far than they are
Yeah.
in Europe. So what's
Yeah. So
that about?
the foremost expert, I'd say, on kind of pluralistic school systems outside of the United States, her name is Ashley Berner. She's at Johns Hopkins University. She wrote a book on this. She did a TED Talk on it too. And she points out that other countries tend to have more school choice than the United States. And she points to places like Finland, where they have a nationwide school choice program. I think Denmark also has a high degree of choice, where you don't have as much of this residential assignment problem. In Quebec, Canada, they fund whatever type of school system you want to go to. If you want to go to the Catholic school, the money follows the student. And even if you want to homeschool, I think in Quebec, they give you a quarter of the total funding that would have been spent in the government-run institutions. You could use that for homeschooling. So I don't know exactly why it's different, but it's very interesting when the teachers unions here, they will point to Finland and say, well, we got to do what Finland does. And we got to implement that here because Finland's doing a good job on the test. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for why those test scores are different. And they like to pick out one thing and basically say that that's the thing that they want. So they ignore that Finland has nationwide school choice. They don't want that. They ignore that Finland spends less per student than we do in the United States. They don't want to lower funding. They'll just say, oh, Finland gives more teacher autonomy. And they're like, okay, let's do that here. Some of their teachers make six figures. We want to do that here. And so it's funny how they cherry pick certain aspects of systems and then ignore some of the more relevant items like competition from school choice.
So are the trends good? Are things going in the right direction, you think?
Here, for sure, we're winning so much, I'm almost getting tired of winning, Ron. We've had more advancement in school choice in the past 4 years than in the preceding 4 decades. And that's because Randy Weingarten stepped on a rake. She doesn't know when to stop with the political craziness. And when they fought to keep the schools closed, that woke up parents like we've never seen before.
I was about to say, I think that she got onto the national radar not
Yeah.
only for people who are interested in education, but for the rest of the world, and I include myself in that. Um, why was she, and now we know why, because the policy decision of reopening schools at the federal level was being influenced by purely partisan
Yeah.
considerations.
The school should have been, even Fauci said the school should be the last things to close and the first things to open. So when you're even more far off the deep end than Fauci, which the unions were because they had a financial interest in keeping the schools closed, they got $190 billion in so-called COVID relief starting in March of 2020. They didn't spend it on safely reopening schools. They spent it on what they always wanted, hiring more Democrat foot soldiers, hiring more union members to get more money. And they used those closures as leverage at the bargaining table because they said they were able to say, well, we'll open if you give us even more money. And so I actually did a study with Christos Makrides, a couple of them. One of them, it was the first one to find heavier union districts were less likely to open in person. I mean, to you and I, that was a no-brainer, but the academics act like not that like they need proof for everything. So there was like 6 or 7 studies after mine that also found the same thing, looking at different data sets using different methods. So that was a clear finding in the literature. But we also found that the school districts that had more money, if anything, they were less likely to open. Why? Because the union districts pushed for two things at once. They've pushed for more money and they pushed for keeping their doors closed longer. Look at Chicago. They were tweeting out that it was racist and sexist to reopen schools. They had a board member vacationing in Puerto Rico while saying it was too dangerous to go back to work. I mean, it was so much hypocrisy. And in a place like in California, there was actually a stupid closure order that closed the schools, but not the daycares. So, I mean, like COVID was smart. It knew if you were learning something, it was going to activate and get you. But if you were just sitting there as a daycare, you were going to be fine, I guess. But there was a private school that actually rebranded itself in Sacramento County, California, to be a daycare so that they could open their doors for business. I mean,
Wild.
yeah, we were a school, but now trust us, we're just a daycare. And that goes to show you the incentives that are messed up on the public sector
Exactly.
side.
Exactly. Too much government regulating too many things in too many sectors, and again, the rent seeking. It's just a force of nature. Don't blame people for being evil. No, actually, blame them for being evil. They're still being evil. Corey, great hour just flew by just like that. Great talking to you. I'm so glad we had a chance to chat and catch up. Best. When exactly did the book come out?
My book's been out for over a year now. It's
Over a
from
year now.
2024. It's called The Parent
So,
Revolution, backed by Trump. It's on Amazon. It's now 40% off on Amazon if you want to check it out. And Ted Cruz says on the back, you can ruin Randy Weingarten's day by reading this book.
I can't wait for the movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Corey, great talking to you. Thanks for coming on and culminating along with me today.